Welcome back to Crawlspace and Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today. I love it when we do these dual episodes where we have this one subject that is very applicable to both of our shows. So really happy to be back and happy to have, a guest on that we immediately recognize as someone who can speak to this subject in a very professional capacity. What he's accomplished in the past is very applicable to what we're talking about today. And I'm so happy that you and I are able to do this episode where we're going to review the conversation that was had. You were in the field doing podcast detective work and unable to join this conversation. And we have to take the opportunity to talk to this gentleman as soon as we can. So how are you today, Tim? Are you as excited about this as I am?
Yeah, doing well over here. Yeah, we're continuing our coverage of the potential new and active serial killer in New England. There have been some updates, and yes, Lance did a great job speaking with Dr. Michael Arntfield on Crawlspace last week. That came out somewhere in the middle of May. That was released on Crawlspace. So what we're going to do here in this episode is play some clips from that conversation with Dr. Michael Arntfield, and then we're going to comment on what he says during those clips, because I do feel like there are some points that we can make and just some comments to make about what he says, because what he says is very rich. But before we get to the clips with Dr. Michael Arntfield, let's take a quick break here, and then we're going to come back and we'll discuss the bodies that have been found in New England. Okay, back here on Crawlspace and Missing for this continuing coverage of the potential serial killer in New England. And Lance, so let's run down this list of bodies that have been found, some more suspicious than others, as we've been saying here. March 6th, 2025, there was the remains of a woman found near Norwalk, Connecticut, and she was found in the river. Her clothes were found on the bank of the Norwalk River.
And also on March 6th, unidentified remains were located by a hunter in a wooded area in Plymouth, Massachusetts. As of this time, there is still no information on the gender, the age, or the cause of death.
And then on March 19th, 2025, the remains of Suzanne Wormser were located near a cemetery in Groton, Connecticut. Now, this was kind of a wild case because they arrested a man named Donald Koffel, who was Suzanne's roommate. And apparently Donald attacked Suzanne because she stole $200 worth of his crack. And he attacked her with a baseball bat, killed her, dismembered her, and put her in bags and trash receptacles near this cemetery in Groton, Connecticut. So Koffel was arrested, charged with murder, and then he died later at the Corrigan Correctional Center, and that's according to the Connecticut Department of Correction. So interesting story there. That one is kind of, I guess, wrapped up in a sense. Doesn't seem like Donald Koffel, who was an older man, doesn't seem like he is a serial killer.
And on March 20th, the remains of missing New Haven mother Denise Leary were found in a wooded area near a home. Denise had been missing since September 30th, 2024. And the New Haven police issued a statement in response to social media claims about her death, saying that there was no indication of criminality in the case. And the New Haven Police Department hasn't been able to determine the exact cause behind Denise Leary's mysterious death. According to the official statement, her remains were found in an advanced state of decay, and investigators working at the scene actually couldn't determine her gender or her age on the site.
Right. So it sounds like she had been there for several months, and she couldn't have been there more than 6 months because she only went missing in September.
Right. So it's probably very indicative of her passing very soon after she was declared a missing person, September 30th of the year before, 2024. So that decay has to have started as soon as possible.
And then on March 26, 2025, the remains of a missing woman were located. The family believes her death is suspicious, but is adamant that she was not the victim of a serial killer. And we have spoken about this case. We've named this person, but again, her family is very adamant. They do not want her mentioned as a part of this conversation.
And on April 9th, 2025, unidentified remains were located in Killingly, Connecticut. There, at this time, is no information on gender, age, or cause of death.
Okay, and then on April 22nd, 2025, 45-year-old Megan Meredith's body was found near a bike path in Springfield, Massachusetts, and her death has been investigated as a homicide, and it is officially ruled a homicide. And so Megan Meredith was discovered by police, and she was unresponsive, and actually she died after they had found her, but her death was ruled a homicide. So definitely an interesting series of events there, and I'm not trying to suggest the police had anything to do with her death, by the way. Definitely not suggesting that. So this is an interesting story, definitely something we're going to be following.
Yes, and just to piggyback on that, when you start to kind of try to wrap your head around this, and we actually talked a little bit about this in the conversation with Michael Arntfield, that police discovered this individual, and this individual has not passed yet. She's not dead yet. And I believe there's another article that says that there were failed attempts to resuscitate her. So at what state is a body in? What condition are they in when any attempts of resuscitation are applied? And the first thing that we thought of, the first thing that most people think of when you hear that somebody was found like that and they were unresponsive and attempts to resuscitate were unsuccessful, I think typically like one of the options is that it's a drug overdose. So that was where most of our heads went to when we heard about this, but then we find out that this is ruled a homicide. So what was the manner of homicide that was applied where police actually thought that they could resuscitate this person? Because if gunshot wounds, stab wounds, like these are obvious things, how does the application of resuscitation apply there? So that's just something to kind of wrap your head around. When this body's discovered, did they actually try to resuscitate her? Or was that just something that a reporter assumed when they said that she died later on?
Okay, and I do want to mention the murder of Joanne Gorelli from Springfield. And I'm bringing her up right now because she was found murdered, and apparently there was a neck wound, and I have no further information on that. But she was found on January 7th by a woman walking her dog, and she was found in Forest Park in Springfield, Massachusetts. So I have no more details on that. Just that had her body been found during this time period that people are citing in this overall story, right? March, April, May. If we backed it up a couple of months, Joanne Gorelli's murder would have been a part of that. And again, she's found very close to where Megan Meredith was found. So we're talking like a matter of a couple of miles, maybe, somewhere in that range.
So Gorelli was found in Forest Park, and Megan Meredith was found on the bike path, which is just outside of Forest Park.
Yeah, so I do find that those couple of deaths interesting, could potentially be connected. I'm not trying to make any connections, but I'm just commenting that people aren't actually connecting their cases as part of a serial killer, which is odd to me because we're talking about a serial killer, but if you backed up the time period, you may actually have a serial killer.
And on April 23rd, 41-year-old Andrew Gumpel and 42-year-old Jonathan Thompson were beaten and stabbed to death. Their bodies found buried in some dirt. 30-year-old Jay Blodgett is facing 2 counts of murder. And there's a quote from prosecutor James Gubitos. Quote, "We eventually found 2 individuals with apparent blunt force trauma and stab wounds that were deceased. They were hidden in the woods by various items and dirt. And this took place in Salem, Massachusetts, in the area of a local Walmart."
Okay, that doesn't seem related to the others, but of course we don't know for sure. And then on April 25th, the Bristol County DA Thomas Quinn confirmed that Samuel Stovall, who is 51 years old, of Taunton, Massachusetts, was found in Mill River by folks walking. and he had obvious signs of decomposition. Quinn's office said the death had not been deemed suspicious, but that the investigation remains open.
And on April 30th, the remains of another male, 39-year-old Stephen Myers, were found in a construction site in Taunton, Massachusetts. The DA said Myers, quote, died as a result of a gunshot wound, end quote. And you and I have talked about that, Tim. When you hear died as a result of a gunshot wound, my head goes to like a gunshot wound to the head. But I just want to be clear, that's not what this is saying at all. It
could be the case.
There are many accounts that just, it could be the case, but we're not specifying it right here. Because when you hear that, you think like an organized crime hit or something like that.
And then on April 30th, 72-year-old Glastonbury, Connecticut resident Mary Colasanto, who had been reported missing, was found in the Connecticut River in the town of Rocky Hill. And the Glastonbury Police Department said that no further details were available at the time of the press release.
This is a name that doesn't come up very often when people are talking about a list of these bodies that are found. So if people are doing their own search on this, this one comes up in just a couple, maybe just one article. And on May 7th, 2025, the murdered remains of 35-year-old Nyasha Mendez were found at the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut. Edwin Arroyo Roman of New Haven was charged with Mendez's murder as well as tampering with evidence. Interesting bit of information here. Edwin Arroyo Roman not only confessed to Mendez's murder, but he confessed to 3 additional murders in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, very interesting.
So is this a serial killer here?
I do find it almost ironic that we're talking about a serial killer in New England, and there may be one. Arroyo Roman confessed to murders in a different territory, that being Puerto Rico. Yeah, it could be true. Might not be true. I don't know. Okay, and then the most recent story here, May 14th, 2025, folks on a beach in Watch Hill in Westerly, Rhode Island, which is about 200 yards from Taylor Swift's Rhode Island mansion, found what appeared to be a human leg bone. And People magazine reports that investigators are waiting on official confirmation of the identity of the remains, but at this point, no foul play is suspected. But it is truly wild how this part of the story is being framed by some news outlets. Here's just one headline out there.
Please, give us the example.
Wait, what does Taylor Swift have to do with a serial killer? ? I mean, that's the headline, and it's a picture of Taylor Swift. Like, nothing. Like, I'm pretty sure she has nothing to do with it, except she has a house not too far from where a leg bone was found.
Right, and this is a leg bone. It's not being described in any of these articles as someone who has been dismembered and they're finding parts of this body. It really could be a number of things. There's been nothing saying that this is a murder. There's nothing saying that it's not a murder. But what is being said in the public, in headlines like what you just read, is the highest level of speculation that I've seen with this New England serial killer. The fact that they had a choice, you and I joked about this before we started recording, the fact that they had a choice at The Cut, the publication The Cut, who released that with that headline, they didn't have to phrase it as a question like the way they did. They didn't have to put the word wait in there. And that word wait just grabs you. Like, wait, what does she have to... And the picture of Taylor Swift, what I'm saying is, if we wanted the perfect media personality to bring these flames to a gigantic bonfire, it's Taylor Swift. Somehow, Taylor Swift's name, wait, what does she have to do with it, is connected to this. And if you read this article at The Cut, it's laugh out loud funny. They're forcing these connections. And then at the end, it's like, hey, no, it's just satire. We're just, this isn't for real stuff. That's the tone of it.
Yeah, no, I think you used the important word there, forcing. And this is kind of totally forcing a celebrity's name into this story. Kind of a weird thing, but that's what happens.
Like if the media gods were looking at this and saying, hey, this story's about to peter out. We need that accelerant to really put it into another stratosphere. It's Taylor Swift. There's nobody else.
Here we go. Yep.
Here we go. Yeah.
Okay, so that is the rundown of the bodies that have been found in New England. We even mentioned Joanne Gorelli from January. I'm sure there are others too, but I'm not aware of those right now. But so most of these deaths happened between March, April, and May of 2025, and there are some murder victims. The possibility of a serial killer or even multiple serial killers here in this group of stories that we're talking about, but certainly no confirmation at this time.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to throw a 2 commercial break, and we'll be right back to play clips from Lance's conversation with Dr. Michael Arntfield.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Okay, here's the first clip that we pulled from Dr. Michael Arntfield's conversation with Lance, and it's just describing Michael Arntfield's background.
Dr. Michael Arntfield, professor and criminologist at Western University, founder and director of the university's cold case research group, former police detective in Canada, director of the Murder Accountability Project in Washington, D.C., Fulbright scholar at a number of U.S. universities, including Vanderbilt, author of 12 books on criminal investigations, and just finished, I think now, 18 seasons of true crime cable and streaming series, including season 2 of a show called Somebody's Hiding Something, which will be the next one out.
Okay, that's a pretty darn impressive background, Lance. He really is one of the most perfect guests I can think to speak on what's happening here.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that he could have gone on. He kind of truncated his credentials there. He could have gone on a lot longer, and it's pretty rare that someone comes on the show a couple of times beforehand, like a few times beforehand, and we've talked to him over the course of the past few years.
Yeah, we've even met him at CrimeCon.
We met him at CrimeCon, yep. And then he introduces himself in this conversation, and I didn't know he was a doctor.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a new development or if I had missed it from his previous appearances.
I think he just didn't mention it before.
Yeah. Well, he's so accomplished that I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So accomplished that the doctor part just slipped his mind.
Okay, and the second clip here is, I think, the longest clip that we pulled. It's about 6 minutes, and this is a great section where Michael Arntfield speaks about the smiley face killers, and he also mentions the Boston Strangler, and it's coming up as part of a sociological impact of this story.
So this is a really fascinating sociological phenomenon, regardless of how this ends in terms of any criminal investigation or legal outcome. Really reminds me sort of at least for now, a miniaturized version of the smiley face killer case. So not the happy face killer, which is that Netflix series, but the officially unsolved and many would say really uncorroborated theory of a series of drownings across the U.S. of college-age males under suspicious circumstances where a smiley face is found near the water, where either they went into the water or where the bodies were recovered. That's a really interesting case because you can find patterns in anything. And overwhelmingly, statistically speaking, in terms of the investigations, those cases have been explained as either accidental or undetermined. But you can put a lens on that, particularly when you're dealing with a large region, and say, well, there was no consistent investigative methodology because one was found in Wisconsin, one was found in Minnesota, different police departments, different methods, different levels of competence. So we can't say that, at least some of these aren't part of a pattern. So it's the same thing here. New England's believe it or not, a big area. You know that. Lots of different police jurisdictions, and they're handling these all very differently in terms of either information they're prepared to release or when there's an account of a body being found, whether that is by way of press release or that just gets leaked. Because otherwise, a body just being found as a result of a natural death, a suicide, or even an accident isn't necessarily going to be something the police are going to release. Certainly not without locating the next of kin. So we've got a constellation of unusual things happening here that I think is very easy for people to synthesize all that into a narrative of that these must be related. And you talked about a couple of the things that will lend credence to such a theory. One, a number of female victims who appear to have nothing in common. Two, the bodies being found outside. So when you have females found dead outside, people immediately, particularly in the true crime milieu that we're in, think body dump. You think multiple females unrelated to each other. You think stranger attacks, multiple victims, multiple locations, outdoor disposals, must be a serial killer. Has all this sort of, it checks all the boxes, at least of serial killer as we think of in the conventional sense. So somebody who is either what we call a category 1 or category 2 serial offender. Category 1, this is a U.S. Justice Department, National Center for the Research of and Analysis of Violent Crime categorization. Type 1 or Category 1 is an offender, typically targets a stranger, transports the victim, and conceals them outdoors. So like in the woods, something like the Green River Killer might have done. And Category 2 is somebody who targets a stranger, transports them, but just dumps them. They have certain, obviously, common characteristics, each of these offenders, things in common, sort of recurring demographic traits that allows, again, this is the origin of investigative analysis, or what was once called profiling, where you can start to say, okay, somebody who drives or transports and conceals, we know from the data, have things in common that differentiate them from someone who just drives and dumps. And they have a different relationship, obviously, to the victim, to the scene. So without necessarily knowing these classifications and this what we call offender taxonomy, people who watch true crime, read true crime, listen to true crime podcasts, they already know this stuff intuitively. So they think of, okay, we have females being found outside in numbers. The police are releasing or acknowledging these deaths, which suggests that, maybe they're not suicides. Suicides as a policy almost universally in the G7 are not reported on by law enforcement agencies unless there's some public interest in it or the media gets a hold of it because it's a person of public interest. Natural deaths are not reported on outside of death notices and obituaries. So why is it that police are acknowledging or reporting on these unless there is an active investigation that's in the public interest? So all the ingredients are there, but there's been no investigative updates. This also buys into the theory, or allows people to buy into the theory, in that there is unfortunately a rich history of law enforcement agencies, particularly interagency task forces. So if you have multiple agencies investigating connected crimes, particularly interstate investigations, they're going to be very reluctant to admit that there's a serial killer. So this isn't something they're going to come out and say right away. And in fact, I've seen some media reporting that harkens back to the Boston Strangler case, which remains very infamous. New England, specifically Massachusetts, serial killer, where actually the opposite happened. They were very quick to label this a serial killer and release too much information to the public, to the extent that now really the criminological theory is that it was Boston Stranglers, plural, and that people got it in their mind that they were very excited by this very specific MO and signature that was released to the public, what would have been normally known as holdback information, so information held back for investigative reasons, and that there was copycats, and that, DeSalvo, who history now deems to be the Boston Strangler because he's the DNA man, there's a DNA match to the final known victim, he likely wasn't the only one responsible for what are anywhere between 8 and 12 deaths, depending on how rigorously you want to catalog them. So that was a bit of a rant, but I think that sums up what we're dealing with right now. And this is one of those things that is neither verifiable nor falsifiable. You cannot disprove that this isn't the work of a serial killer currently, but you also can't prove it. And it's nothing more than conjecture that I think has gained massive traction and momentum as a result of social media, which we've seen it with cases before the courts. Social media decided in a world of trial by Netflix that the Menendez brothers should get a resentencing hearing. And social media by decree has decided that New England has a serial killer. But I'm not sure either of those things are good ideas.
Really interesting stuff there from Dr. Michael Arntfield. I like that he mentioned the smiley face killers and that story, because that is actually something we dug into in the very early days of the Crawlspace podcast. I want to say we did an episode or two about these bodies that had been turning up in the Boston area in water, and there were a lot. And so it was kind of one of those things that was a little bit of a cultural phenomenon, because people would say that this is the smiley face killers, and they would find graffiti nearby of a smiley face. Turns out there's a lot of water in Boston. There's a lot of graffiti, and smiley face is a very common thing to mark as graffiti. So that story of the smiley face killers really never took off because there was never any evidence, right? And it's definitely bigger than just Boston, by the way. We've heard of situations like that all over the country and the world, in fact. So I don't know if that's what we're dealing with here with this story in New England right now, but it seems like that was wise of Dr. Michael Arntfield to make that connection.
And I do like how he says he went on a bit of a rant there, but even when he's going on a, quote, bit of a rant, he delivers this information that is like highly educational. And he's got really nothing to work from here. He's got no connection between any of the victims that were found, any of the bodies that were found, no substantial connection. And what he's doing is backing that up and providing information for the listeners to understand where he's coming from and where law enforcement comes from when these things happen. So he's trying to understand the totality of the discoveries that have been going on since the beginning of March here. And he talks about the category 1 and the category 2 style of disposing of a body, and how one of them is more calculated, drives, transports them, dumps them, and conceals them, where the other one drives and just dumps them. That's something that I think a lot of our listeners really need to know when we talk about these occurrences, whether it's the New England serial killer rumors or other bodies that have been discovered. That's important information. That's huge when it comes to the profiling of a person who would calculate and execute these crimes. He also brings up something that is a new phrase for me, this trial by Netflix. And he brought it up a couple of times during the conversation, the Menendez brothers, and how Netflix can release a documentary or a docuseries, and all of a sudden convicted murderers get a second chance at a trial, and they're able to be released, or they're able to be judged again, and you're judged by way of Netflix. I thought that was really incredible that he brought that up, and made me wonder where we are at in the state of the system, like where are we at? How is that good? Is it bad? Like, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that like, where are we at in a bad way? Like, where are we at? Is it good that the public can have that big of an impact now?
Yeah. I don't know. I would say good and bad. You can definitely make a case for both. But yeah, as he said, the power of social media, and it is a kind of a wild thing. Still a developing story there.
Exactly.
Social media.
And the kids out there might know the Boston Strangler because there was a recent movie in the past year, I believe.
Yeah, past couple of years on Hulu.
Hulu production. Keira Knightley was in it. So that's like the latest pop culture reference or media reference to the Boston Strangler or Boston Stranglers. But his example is the misuse of the media by law enforcement. They gave out too much information. It gave other individuals the opportunity to commit crimes in a similar fashion that probably will never be caught, because the murders happened, the police released the information, the media took it, it became this firestorm of rumors and swirling innuendos and accusations, and finally DeSalvo is deemed the Boston Strangler. And how cool is that Boston had this moment and they were able to bring justice to the victims, and then it's discovered that, wait a second, that might not actually be the case. So it's all this tedious tightrope walking between what information is had by law enforcement, how they deliver it to the media, and what the media does with it. And what's the purpose of delivering it in a way where, like, do you want to put it out there so that this becomes a lasting legacy, or do you want to actually have justice?
Okay, so let's play our third clip here from Michael Arntfield.
2 or more victims that are connected is widely regarded as the threshold that you can classify a case as a serial killer investigation. Officially speaking, the U.S. code that governs the FBI's involvement in serial killer investigations still says that there needs to be 3 or more victims with compelling similarities to suggest that it's a serial killer. But that's strictly a bureaucratic designation to warrant the involvement of the FBI if they're wanted. Criminologists and most police officers would say, you've got 2 or more victims, we're not going to wait for the federal definition of a third victim to drop before we start investigating this as a pattern. So my guess is around that same time. Can we put a date on it? No. I mean, that's the problem with this type of amorphous sort of, I don't want to call it an urban legend, but this is how urban legends start. Really, I think it's up to the police here to clear the air. I can think of some really bad examples. So near where I am in Toronto several years ago, and I appeared in a documentary on this. There's a serial killer named Bruce McArthur. He's now convicted. We'll never know how many victims he had, but the chief of police in Toronto at the time, when there was a number of disappearances of men in the Toronto gay village, never seen again, like just up and vanished. A number of men. You can look up this case. Chief of police stood in front of a bank of mics at a press conference, said, "There's no active serial killer in the city of Toronto." At exactly the same time that press conference was going on, police had Bruce McArthur under surveillance and broke down the door to his apartment while he had his next victim literally chained to his bed. Out of the movies, they saved this guy's life. They already had him under surveillance for weeks. They had surreptitiously entered his apartment, downloaded, imaged his hard drive, knew that he had. Anyways, long story short, he was a necrophile, dismembered all these men, and he was a gardener, and he buried the dismembered remains in a series of plants at high-end properties that he basically was tasked with overseeing. This investigation was going on actively, and either was not known to the chief or it was suppressed. This is very recent history. We talk about the Boston Strangler. I mean, that's 60 years ago. This is like 10 years ago. And so mistakes do happen. Investigations can be ongoing, and the police public information officer or chief will say something to the opposite, either strategically or just because they don't know. So just because police are saying these aren't related, especially when you're dealing with multiple agencies, we don't know. So somebody, as this gains momentum, has to go on the record on behalf of these various agencies and say, like, we are actively investigating this. We don't know what it is. Bear with us. Or we can rule out definitively that this is even criminal. We don't know it's criminal. But again, multiple females found outside, strange. And where there's strange things happen, people will, like I said, in an information vacuum, fill in the blanks.
Really interesting stuff there from Michael Arntfield. Classification, designations for serial killers. I'm always interested in hearing about that. So it's 2 or 3 murders makes a serial killer, depending on what source you're looking at. But the Bruce McArthur stuff, really interesting.
Yeah. And
really interesting to know that the chief says there's not a serial killer in town at the exact same time that they're arresting Bruce McArthur, a serial killer that they had been investigating. Great point by Michael there. Unclear if he was aware of the investigation or not.
Yeah, they arrest the serial killer moments before probably executing his next victim, like in the act of serial killing.
Yeah.
And really, really interesting comparison that he uses there. But he used in the beginning of that this word that I just think really encapsulates or is very apropos to this topic, which is amorphous. He says it's very amorphous, and that's like something that has no shape. It hasn't taken a shape yet, and all the pieces are there. Like all the pieces are there for a story, and there's just no shape to it yet. And that's where we're at with the coverage of this. And, you know, we're fascinated by the fact that these bodies are being included in a conversation about a serial killer. And I think that word amorphous really helps at least me wrap my head around where we're at and why this is happening. Like maybe there's no answer yet because it hasn't taken shape, but all the info that he gives us helps us to give it a shape. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Okay, and this next clip here, Michael calls this a runaway story.
This has become a runaway story that at some point there needs to be an unimpeachable, unequivocal answer as to what is going on. Because this is, again, multiple jurisdictions. This is affecting collaterally multiple police departments and investigators. And if one of these is, say, what we call an undetermined death, so cause of death and manner of death are two different things. Manner of death, you're limited to really only 5. So homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined, which is you can't necessarily make a determination, at least initially, on the manner of death. They could have fallen down. They could have been pushed down the stairs. Those are complex investigations. And if people are saying, oh, this is part of a serial killer pattern, that's going to affect the ability of those investigators, whether they be police investigators or medical investigators, to get objective data from witnesses who are maybe hearing about this and don't want to be involved. or have already made up their mind about what they think happened to this person and why they were in the woods on that day. So there are real implications when these things get out of control like this. So this is, like I said, regardless of its eventual legal legacy, is a sociological phenomenon that I think will be studied in years to come, much like, and here's another case from the annals of crime history, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Illinois. There's a bunch of theories about what happened, but the thought was someone was releasing some kind of toxic gas into homes to poison people. And then everybody was claiming that they had either seen this person, that they were a victim as well. I mean, one of the cases was somebody was allegedly overcome with the fumes of what was ultimately determined to be their own nail polish remover. And there's a huge criminal investigation into this, that this was, the theory was somebody who had absconded with some mustard gas, maybe from World War I, and was deploying it into homes to terrorize this small community. It was all just a self-perpetuating urban legend. A lot of resources used at the same time. I compare it all the time to the anthrax mailings of 2001. I was a street cop at the time, and every single day, somebody thought they were getting an anthrax letter because they saw it in the news. So now every letter contained anthrax, or people were finding anthrax in their house with no self-awareness that, okay, no one actually knows you exist. I'm not sure they're going to synthesize anthrax spores and mail them to you. So this is what people do. I'm hoping that this is all for naught, but it's going to take somebody to shut this down. And it's for the reason it was never properly. There was no united front in the Smiley Face deaths case to say, no, these are not related. And there was enough retired law enforcement that wanted to get in on the action and be on television series who said, oh, in our opinion, that these are connected, these are homicides. So it was just there's too much confusion. It was just an omnidirectional narrative. And that's why people are still talking about that. And my fear is that if these aren't criminal homicides, that these people maybe unfortunately took their own lives or dead in accidents will just all be cobbled together as part of a story that ultimately becomes urban legend, and that didn't really need to be. And it's going to take somebody to come out and, I think, set the record straight on that. Who that person is, I don't have an answer to that question. But this is, again, when task forces carry a lot of gravitas. So put together a task force if these are multiple agencies and say, we've investigated them, we've had our findings, double checked and peer reviewed. There's no reason to believe, there's no evidence to say that these are connected and that these are criminal occurrences.
Wow.
Yeah, he mentioned the Mad Gasser of Mattoon and anthrax moment from after 9/11, if folks remember that, where it was a bit of a cultural phenomenon, people thinking male had anthrax and, less of a problem than it actually was, I guess. And this Mad Gasser of Mattoon, kind of the same thing, right? I think people thought there was a murderer out there. It doesn't seem like there was.
Another thing that fascinates me about Dr. Arntfield is that he can so quickly and consistently apply the perfect example to what he's talking about. And he does it twice in that clip with the Mad Gasser and with the anthrax. And I don't know why it makes me laugh every time he says, or every time I hear him say, you don't exist in the person's head who is taking anthrax spores and like cultivating them in order to send, like, you're not that important. I think that's just something really amazing to wrap my head around, that people didn't have the self-awareness. That's what he said. They weren't self-aware enough to realize, like, you don't matter anyone who can perform that task, you don't matter in their world. They're sending that anthrax to more important people. But it turns into this, again, this like omnidirectional, what he said, this amorphous thing, and you can't reel it in, you can't lasso it in, which I think is endlessly fascinating.
Okay, and here is the fifth clip. What would it look like if there was actually a serial killer in New England?
If these are connected and they're recurring, and I'm not saying this is the case, but hypothetically, if these are connected, they're criminal occurrences and it's recurring and there's nobody in custody, there's an existential ongoing public safety issue that police are then mandated to address by saying, avoid these areas. This is maybe who we're looking for. There'd be something, but there's nothing. given the number of agencies involved in the age we live in, I think if there was something, you'd have one of the agencies want to get in front of this and say, yeah, you know what, we're going to engage the public. We're going to say what we're dealing with, or there'd at least be a leak. Again, is stock in trade for high profile criminal investigations across America. I mean, compared to other countries, I mean, a B-list celebrity gets arrested for a DUI and the mugshots on the internet within an hour. Like that wasn't released to the public. Like the press got that. So there is that whole underground economy in parts of the United States that I would expect would be buzzing with this, and they're not. There's no meat on the bone yet. When I think by now there would be if there was something here.
Good points there. So Arntfield says one of the agencies would get in front of this story if they were sure there was a serial killer here. Whether that's FBI, that's one of the state polices, or even local polices, county, who knows? He says, or there'd be a leak, which I found to be very interesting. And I think that there's definitely a lot of precedent for things like that. I think he's 100% right. I don't think any agency is thinking there is a serial killer at this point.
Right, and he does mention that concept of a leak, that somebody either has to come out in an authoritative position. I think he used the word unequivocal. They have to come out and say what they need to say in order to stop this. And it goes beyond a local police chief or law enforcement spokesperson. What I think he's getting at is somebody from the FBI. And then to go back to the smiley face killings or alleged smiley face killings, he brings up former law enforcement wanting to get involved with the smiley face killings because they wanted media attention. They were retired and they wanted to be on television. It can't be those people either. It has to be somebody currently in the FBI or in some sort of, again, to use his words, this unequivocal position. So either leaked or that. So it seems like he's almost like calling them out in some way. Like you need to say, like, here's all of the reasons why it's not. And this is the importance of us going through this, because you and I both were not on that conversation, and the conversation carries so much weight that we felt the need to go back and play these important clips so that the listeners can hear it again. And then I like to think that maybe our thoughts coincide with the listeners' thoughts. So if they're thinking a certain thing, yeah, we're going to be here to like back you up and say, we're thinking that as well.
Okay, and now here's the second to last clip where Dr. Arntfield talks about the Murder Accountability Project, and that is a really interesting organization. You can find out more at murderdata.org.
Bear in mind that the FBI's Highway Serial Killing Initiative, which is a task force or focus group, if you will, that looks at interstate-related homicides, has clusters across the United States. Like the thought being that these are long haul truckers, and there's a body in Oklahoma linked to bodies in Tennessee and to Louisiana. So, I mean, you're talking massive geographic distances and clusters that aren't contained really to a single city, county, or even state. We need to start thinking about clusters differently when we're dealing with mobile offenders. And that's why I'm really interested to see with the Long Island serial killer, who is a classic example, allegedly, of a commuter killer. So somebody who lives in one jurisdiction, kills in another, disposes in another, or just travels to kill, essentially. So Israel Keys would be another case that your listeners would be interested in looking at. Somebody who turned serial homicide into a hobby and had kill kits stashed all over the United States. He'd fly to a random city, rent a car, dig up the kill kit that he had buried a year earlier, and just go looking for people to kill. And he'd be back on the plane before the body would be found, if it even was found. He's got 2 victims whose bodies were never found, at least. So, yes, this area would qualify as if these are connected in terms of the psychogeography of offenders, so how offenders choose where they kill, where they dump, where they target, how they operate in terms of their spatial environment. This would certainly qualify as actually well within a geographic cluster, never mind that clusters, again, are linked by modus operandi and by signature, so and by victim type. So you could have a cluster that spans many states. Those would be harder to put together, or I think in the traditional sense, you think of clusters as contained to cities or counties or regions. And in this case, yes, this was certainly qualified. And I'm not putting too much to find a point on the fact that, two are in Springfield, which, as you said, there's a lot of smaller towns in the United States that people are unaware, like per capita have crime rates that are greater than LA or Detroit. So yes, 2 in that city isn't necessarily unusual. 1 in a more bucolic setting is unusual. Are they all connected? Again, someone's going to have to come out and definitively say they are or they aren't.
Interesting stuff there. So when he says clusters, he's talking about the Murder Accountability Project and what they've got on their site, on their map. Again, that's murderdata.org. Really interesting resource if you're interested in trying to connect murders. So he said, as far as a geographical cluster, this is well within the range of a cluster. But then he mentions there are other factors that determine clusters too, and we've got nothing else determining a cluster here.
Yeah. And I just want to take a moment to apologize to the city of Springfield. I feel like every time we talk about those murders, I just talk about how like post-apocalyptic Springfield is, how it's just the most dangerous city in the country. Yes, it has a high crime rate, but Dr. Arntfield kind of broke it down for me a little bit. And by saying that, yes, even though it does have a high crime rate, you can look at smaller towns, smaller cities in this country that have a higher crime rate per capita, and it is true, and it's all sort of relative. So I don't mean to totally crap on the city of Springfield. It's a lovely city. The Basketball Hall of Fame's there.
Yep.
Fine city.
Nice casino now.
Yep. So I don't want to say like, Boston's got a higher crime rate, I think, or maybe it's on par with. So I'm not trying to really put down the city of Springfield. So that's
I think you are.
Wholehearted apology to Springfield.
Okay, and here is the final clip from Dr. Michael Arntfield, and he attempts to answer the question, why does the culture seem to want a serial killer in New England?
It's the proverbial car wreck at the side of the road, right? People are fascinated by the macabre, by, things that would be frightening, but at a safe viewing distance are just captivating. And people want to be a part of history, quite frankly. And then, that's what some of this is people trying to create history and document history. But this is really this behavior is synonymous with what I've called, and this is my last book, How to Solve a Cold Case, the 4th wave of true crime, which true crime has existed in some form really since the 1850s. It goes in cycles, and the current cycle that we're in is defined by the social media dimension and the fact that it's participatory, it's immersive true crime. So the closest you could get to that in the past, and the 3rd wave would be like shows like Unsolved Mysteries, where you could call in a tip, or you could go on a walking tour of Whitechapel in East London, England, and walk the streets that Jack the Ripper walked. Whereas now you can actually create meta content. We've seen it again where people are influencing outcomes of investigations and of court processes. One way or it is impossible to disaggregate whatever happens with the Menendez brothers from those Netflix productions. And there are people languishing in jail who are actually innocent or who are actually over-sentenced, who don't have Netflix shows and will never see their day in court or be celebritized like those two. But those series were produced, people watch them, people comment on them, creates this entire 3rd column of content. And then, people with some influence get involved or are influenced themselves by it, between reality show celebrities to highly ideological activist DAs. And lo and behold, now we have a true crime production that, once it enters the echo chamber of social media, actually has demonstrable effects in the courtroom. It's insane. And people would say, well, that's the democratic process. And that's, how, people vote with their keyboards and social media, I guess, once they learn the facts. But I guess the unanswerable question is, whose truth does true crime convey, right? Truth is, in realm of true crime, very subjective. It was originally, so you go back, the history of true crime is really interesting. If you go back, there's been an Edgar Award, so the Mystery Writers of America Award, literary award for what they used to call fact crime, going back to, I think, the 50s. So it has existed, like I said, in some form since the 1850s, and since the 1940s or 50s, there's been a recognized literary genre, but it was called fact crime because it had to be factually based, sourced, cited, corroborated. Now, true. It's not fact anymore. It's just true. And as we know, there's always two kinds of truth.
Here's where I'm out on what Dr. Michael Arntfield has to say. He's just showing off now.
He gathered up a bunch of microphones and dropped them at the same time. I mean, the conversation was over when he said, "Whose truth does true crime convey?" It was just a boom moment. And then to not just have that statement dangle in the air, he backed it up with the historical references and facts that got him there by saying that this genre, true crime, the genesis of it was actually fact crime. Not true, fact crime. I mean, done. Like, incredible.
I mean, it kind of makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a whole genre of literature that was titled fact crime until it became true crime. Thus, whose truth does true crime convey?
Yeah, he's not wrong. People can create their own realities these days. We see it happening
Their own
on
truths.
large scales, small scales. Each news outlet, you could argue, creates its own reality. Yeah, fact crime before true crime. I'd like to think we do some fact crime, but clearly what we're doing here is true crime because we're commenting, and fact crime seems like just the facts. So, yeah, wow.
Well,
really
it
interesting.
also made me feel a little bit better about what we're doing, because every time we talk about the New England serial killer, I don't mean what we're doing in this genre in total. I mean what we're doing in this topic with the New England serial killer rumors. Like, I kept kind of wrestling with, is this something that is responsible on our part to keep talking about this? But when he said that, I realized, no, this is what we should be doing if we want the facts out there. So I felt better after he said that about what we're doing, talking about this New England serial killer rumor, because we are trying to make this into fact crime by constantly saying there's no connection. Law enforcement is saying there's nothing suspicious, or there is something suspicious. This is a homicide. It's not a homicide. We're just trying to continually put facts out there. So I felt a little better. Like, we're not trying to sensationalize anything. And that's just the really fortunate part of doing what we do, is to have someone like him on saying those things, you know, dropping that statement and then realizing, like, okay, you know, we're not being totally reckless with this information.
No, I don't think so. And we're making updates where we can, which is different from print journalism. You know, you can't
Right.
edit an article that had already been published. And, you know, I guess technically we could edit audio that we've published, but I think rather than go back like that, I think releasing updated information is the way we typically handle that. So, yeah, really interesting stuff. And so we are going to be back probably next week with another episode on this same topic. We're bringing in John Lorden and Mike Morford. Actually, I think we're going to be on John Lorden's Brain Scratch YouTube channel. So check that out. Look for that. And that will also be released here on these podcast feeds, so you can hear it here as well. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate you sticking with us. Let us know what you think on Spotify and YouTube.